Okay, well, people still coming in. Welcome to the ACT lecture series. Most of you, of course, know us by the meantime. My name is Ute Bauer, and here's my colleague Jegan Vincent de Paul. And we have this lecture series associated to our own course, which is about artistic interventions, creative responses to conflict and crisis, but also the course of Gediminas Orbonas about network cultures and participatory media, as well as the Ducho Jonas performance workshop. And we all approach the topic kind of from different ends, but we share the lectures and the input we get from the speakers also as a point of departure in the class. And in the case of our course, some of our students are actually blogging about the speakers ahead of time and also afterwards give comments. And you can find those on the zonesofelmergency.mit.edu. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay, I never know. I'm not such a blogger, I have to admit. And before I introduce tonight's speakers, Jegan will say a little bit about the next upcoming project we have at ACT in part of the lecture series, but also other events, but also how tonight the focus actually on the 311 Japan initiative at MIT and in specific Shun Kanda and James Wescoat connect to also what we do in the course.
Thanks again for everyone for being here tonight. Again, my name is Jegan Vincent de Paul. I'm a lecturer here at ACT, and I co-teach the class Creative Responses to Conflict and Crisis with Ute Bauer. And tonight is a special event for us in relation to the lecture series and the class we teach because both Shun Kanda and James Wescoat are here, and Ute will introduce them a bit more later on. So essentially, just before the summer started, Shun approached our program and he asked us what it is that we can contribute to their Japan 311 initiative. And of course, from our perspective, coming from art, culture, and technology, we had a lot to offer in terms of things other than sort of design and the physicality of responses related to the responses. And Uta and I had already started a initiative called the ACT Mobile Lab, which was the idea of taking the classroom outside of the classroom. And so it kind of worked out that we had this opportunity to work with Shun and James and the rest of the students in the Japan 311 initiative workshop, and for me to join them and conduct interviews. So as a respondent, we'll talk more about that later on after the talk. But before they do start talking, we have some events for the upcoming weeks. So the last of the series in our lecture series is on November 21st. We have Amar Karnwar. He's an India-based filmmaker and artist, and he'll be giving his talk called The Impermanent Institution. And his respondent will be Bisaniel, the Ford International Professor of Urban Development and Planning here at MIT. And then on the next event is November 29th. We are visiting artist Florian Hecker, who will have a panel discussion with Ute Bauer, the director of the program, as well as with Professor of Anthropology, Stefan Helmreich. And then on December 8th, we have an evening celebrating the legacy of the Center for Advanced Visual Studies. And this is again December 8th, 6 to 7:30 p.m. And we'll have CAVS Director Emeritus Ardo Pina, as well as Martin Orez, who's the Georgie Kepes Fellow for Advanced Studies and Transdisciplinary Research in Art, Culture, and Technology. Long title. Also, Joan Jonas's exhibit, My New Theater, Reading Dante 3, is extended until December 2nd. And then finally, on December 9th, we have the exhibit Disobedience, an ongoing video archive. And the reception for that will be on December 9th, 5 to 8 p.m. In the Media Labs complex lobby. And this show is curated by Marcos Cotini together with Nobeda and Gediminas Orbonas, with assistant curator Andreas Brinkmanes. And this is an exhibition and project in collaboration with students from ACT course Art, Architecture, and Urbanism and Dialogue, as well as Introduction to Network Cultures and Participatory Media. So with that, I will have to introduce the speakers for tonight.
And the poor speakers. Before I really introduce them, I want to thank the Council for the Arts for, in parts, funding this lecture series. Many of you might not know, but like, I mean, all the extracurricular activities, we usually seek funding and in order to have them open to the public and also to be able to invite speakers that are not from the region. I also want to thank the staff of ACT, specifically Laura Anka-Kiki-san, who is the coordinator for the public programs, and also Chris Klepper, who does all the technology support for it. Jegan, Vincent de Paul, my colleague, Marion Cunningham, Lisa Hickler, and also Andrew Newman for the videotaping the talks that are all available on the blog afterwards. I also want to thank the 3 TAs of the classes that are supporting this event, Nadine Wolitzer, Elizabeth Watkins, and Slobodan Radoman. But now finally I come to our speakers, and we should not really need to introduce them, but as we have some also guests from outside of MIT, I think it's important to know what my colleagues do within and outside of MIT. But I also want to give a bit of the context. In the aftermath of the disaster that Japan suffered, MIT launched the MIT Japan 311 initiative, which is a multi-year collaboration project that focused on disaster resilient planning, design and reconstruction. And Shun Kanda, actually, who is running a regular Japan studio every year, immediately decided to focus with his students on the area. But he also was very careful when we had first talks, and also with professors and students in the media lab, in urban studies and planning, that this cannot be an approach from outside. It has to be a shared effort with people on site. And Shun, through his many years of collaboration in Japan, also had close collaboration with the Minaki University, and also in the case of Minaki Sanriku, the town on which the projects are focusing, he had a contact to the mayor. So I think that this already shows like how careful such endeavors have to be pursued and how critical it is to have local participation and a strong dialogue with the people rather than like coming from the outside and imagine one can bring a solution. So this was also the point of departure, and we were felt very honored in Shun's trust that our program could contribute to this endeavor. And when Shun approached us, he said, like, what is very important is like you have to understand the trauma this town went through. Almost it's 1/3 of the population, and I think it's even more died not in the earthquake but in the tsunami that followed the earthquake. And what can be done in such a dramatic situation to rebuild a town that has completely wiped out and lost such a strong part of its community, and how can you even deal with the trauma that is going on, and what would be the memory of this place, and how much should that play a role in the reconstruction. And when Shun asked us, he said, like, do you have some people who could come and interview people, talk about the memory, talk why people moved even so close to the ocean front while they lived in the past much further away. And that was our point of entry to join Shun. And Shun Kanda, who is since many years a senior lecturer and who is a Tokyo native, basically, as I said, is running the Japan studio since decades here at MIT. So he's very well aware also for the problematic of the specific landscape in Japan that is an area that is affected by earthquakes, by tsunamis. And what does that mean for urban development and also for the population living so close to the ocean? He also, in his design workshops, he developed sustainable models for urban and regional communities in various locations in Japan. And he also is a distinguished visiting professor at Keio University from this fall until 2013. So he has kind of been an intermediary, like connecting MIT's community with Japan, and we are really grateful for his careful guidance. He also kind of encouraged or invited James Wescoat, who is the Aga Khan professor in the School of Architecture and Planning here in our school, who is focusing a lot on also resilience and water management in his practice in very different places on the globe. And James earned his PhD in geography at the University of Chicago and has taught at the University of Chicago, the University of Colorado at Boulder, and the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign before joining us at MIT a few years ago. And in his courses that are also luckily joined by some of our students, he focuses on water hazards and landscape design. And he also was an organizer of the Rethinking Water workshop at MIT in 2010. So you see already how disciplinary wide this initiative is, and how wide this initiative also has to be in order to create a meaningful proposal for what could be done and also what needs to be done. And please, after this lengthy introduction, which I think this kind of initiative also needs, let us welcome Shun Kanda and James Wescoat.
Thank you, Tay, for the generous introduction. I'm going to have a cup of water. The 311 initiative is really a result of many, many people. I'm simply one of them. And it will continue to involve a lot of people aside from my own efforts. It's an overwhelming task, and I, for one, am sure I don't have many of the answers. We are, in a sense, moving as we find our way through. But from March 10th, which was the day before March 11th, I had the good fortune of sitting in my office at MIT with a professor from Miyagi University. And so that was a strange karma where the next day, March 11th, we both heard about the tragedy at the same time. He was on his way back to Sendai. He couldn't make it back. And by March 14th, we had agreed that we should do something together, especially from my side. Someone from a distance without a local connection would be almost impossible to do anything other than a wish, a big wish to help. What I thought I would do today, it's mainly divided into 2 or 3 parts. First, I'll just give you a very quick overview, and then I'm going to pass it on to Jim Wescoat. It's a bit chronological because Jim was part of it during the summer months. And then I'd like to probably take up most of the time in the third portion with what I've been doing since September. And it's still to go on. And I think what I decided was to not dwell on the pictures, images of what you've more than seen enough, but to really see what I've come to, what many of us who've participated have come to understand who we're dealing with, where we're dealing with, what we're dealing with, other than obviously the known fact of a major disaster that's happened due to the earthquake and the tsunami. So I'm from Tokyo, and I know very little of Tohoku before this incident. I had traveled there once. It's a very large place north of Tokyo. Most of us know Japan, Tokyo and south, meaning Osaka, Kyoto, and possibly even Hiroshima, Nagasaki, but very few of us know Tohoku. And if anything, we know Hokkaido, which is the extreme north island. What I have known in the past, and it's proving more and more true, is that the place is very beautiful. The topography, the lay of the land, the geography is exceptionally beautiful, undiscovered almost. And I think that also it's known to be inhabited by that sector of Japanese who are actually very strong inside. So in one sense, they're very stoic, they're very self-sufficient, self-management. The men, the women, not very, I would say, expressive of their troubles nor happiness, their wealth, poverty. They seem to be quite by themselves, with themselves. And I think some of it is because, in a sense, nature surrounds them. They trust nature. I think they're in nature. They trust nature. Those of us from the city, we're stressed with other than something as large as a natural phenomena of the beauty of the land and the sea. So it's very quick, as many of you have seen on the first few days of the newscast. You didn't see too many people who looked outwardly sad. I think they were very calm. They, in fact, appeared very strong. Many of them are very stout and strong and big. But what it does lead to also, among this beautiful setting, are that the forests provide abundant lumber as a means of economy, and also the coastal area, especially the Pacific side, is very well known for an amazing number of bays, inlets, some reminiscent of like Maine, where you have very deep bays connected to estuaries. So this is a very fertile area, coastline, for especially close-up fishing, like oysters, kelp, abalone, and then some deep fishing, but very close to shore, scallops. They're very high quality. They're almost a niche market. I mean, they are very high quality, expensive, and to my mind, looking at this topography every time I go by there, it seems to me that there's essentially a harmony between the size of the bay and the size of the settlement and the mountain behind. So this is totally a non-specialist talking, but it seems to me that there's a real ecological harmony there. To them, I think this topic is not new. To us in the city, it seems to be totally something that's going to happen from now on, that we have to balance natural resources and man's settlement on the earth. But Tohoku strikes me as something that has been balanced for a long time, without waste, despite the largeness, some urbanization, some industrialization, but primarily I think that there's been a balance. And it's very important to keep this in mind, I think, as we go into this very devastated zone. It's no town or no bay or no village or no city is the same from the other. That's one way of putting it. The other is that these people, per each village, per each town, are very proud of their past. They're very proud of their heritage in terms of, I can fish the best compared to you who is at the next bay. And so there's tremendous pride, but on the other hand, there's also tremendous rivalry and very healthy competitiveness. So all this, in a sense, explains, to me at least, why some of the beauty has been kept also, because it's their resources, it's their very precious, valuable means of livelihood. At the same time, we can always find little faults, like who built the highway that's, barring the village from the seacoast, and who took down the cliffside and buried it with concrete so there's no avalanche. So there's some conflicts as well. But in the main, you will see that these people lived with the land in fairly conscious balance, conscious harmony, and conscious sort of livelihood that was not poor. I don't think these people are poor in the sense of an economic bracket. So that's what they had been living with. They are aware that they're close to the Pacific Ocean, which can bring storms, earthquakes. The first earthquake or the first tsunami recorded was a century. So they've had like 6 or 7 major tsunamis up till this one. The largest one recently was 1960. It's called the Chile tsunami, which in the area that we're dealing with was about 6 meters high, which is why the government built a 13-meter high or 10-meter high seawall, which of course now went over. But they're not people who are adverse to or ignorant about natural disasters. But this one was a surprise. So I wanted to give you a picture of one day recently, all of this changed. And I think that regarding the devastation, regarding the sadness, regarding the tragedy that happened, I don't think we need to see more images. But it's an incredible event that has happened. When I was there first in the early part of May, I saw emotion. I saw basically a rescue situation. When we returned, Jim and I and our students returned in July, there was tidying up. You didn't see too many people. You didn't see people, say, suffering, except they were in evacuation centers. And when I'm back in September and this fall, I don't think you see emotion anymore. So things are changing constantly, depending on what time you go, where you go, and so on. Now, that doesn't mean that it's over, but that the resolution, the situation is shifting very fast. This one records the area of high tide in the Minami Sanriku area, which is Miyagi Prefecture, which is where we have been working with. It has had one of the higher hits of the tidal tsunami height. So these are meters representing what hit the area that we are in. Before we went, or as the time we arrived in July, the refugees the evacuees were in emergency shelters. So first was the rescue mission. There's still about 5,000 missing. 15,000 or so have been reported dead nationally. 5,000 are still missing. In our area, much smaller, there's probably about 800 that's passed away. There's still 200 missing, mostly older generation. Many of them died, as I'm told, not just from the earthquake so much, but the tsunami, which repeatedly came, but also the tsunami that on the receding end of the tsunami, not the onslaught, but the receding end. And many also perished between the tsunamis, thinking that they could fetch their belongings from their homes. So there's a lot of chaos in that sense. where we arrived is past this stage that you're seeing, which is still pre-cleanup, and the people are still in July housed in very many public school buildings and so on in their evacuation centers. So where I'm going to switch to Jim is we come in at a point where the site is clear. When we went, I think, Jim, you remember there was the self-defense force still picking, cleaning the debris. It was actually quite shocking to see them checking the debris with sticks as opposed to bulldozers. In other words, they're really looking for bodies still, for small lost items. This was pre-bulldozer period. And I should say that the MIT Japan 311 initiative does operate with collaborating universities of Miyagi University, which is based in Sendai, who have been there since day one, and also Keio University, which is based in Tokyo, and a lot of people from the community. In July and part of August, the Japan Design Workshop, we had students from MIT within that program and students from the other universities. There are two parts. One is up here called the transect, which Jim will explain, and then the notion of trying to come up with a site for a community center. So with this, I will switch to Jim.
All set. Thanks very much, Kanda Sensei, and also to Uta and Jegan for inviting us to be part of the creative responses to conflict and crisis lecture series, and thank you all for coming. I'd like to say a little bit as a non-specialist in the region after this eloquent portrait of the place there we've been working about some of the field of disaster resilient design and some of the framing of this study and inquiry that's followed. I'm with the Aga Khan Program for Islamic Architecture, as was introduced, and there's a very strong interest in the Aga Khan Development Network in issues of hazards preparedness and rapid response by the Focus Humanitarian Organization, as well as in all of the planning and building and Trust for Culture programs in the development network that's concentrating primarily on other regions of the world where the Aga Khan Development Network is focused, in South Asia, India, Pakistan, and Central Asia, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and the entire area, and then Eastern Africa and the Middle East as well. So in that work, I've had an occasion to be offering a seminar on disaster resilient design in the Department of Architecture and also with the Department of Urban Studies and Planning here at MIT. And this seminar has really been inspired in part by this concern in the development network, but it's also reflecting a growing interest amongst our faculty and faculties in really being prepared to do this kind of work regularly and to be thinking of how one is not going to be as greatly shocked by the events that can be anticipated and one can be prepared for in the way of knowing both what the best ideas and methods are for responding, and even beyond before that, for anticipating and reducing the likelihood and the types of losses that can occur in these events. And so that inspiration is coming, in my case, from a leader in the field who passed away in his 90s, named Gilbert White, who helped to create the field of natural hazards research in the United States and worked internationally as well. And he created at the University of Colorado Boulder, where I used to teach, and was a part of a center called the Natural Hazards Research Applications and Information Center. So that Natural Hazards Center, for short, had established early in its development, and it was designed to be primarily a convening and clearinghouse that would link academics and practitioners, the people who are real specialists in different forms of first response and hazards administration and program administration, where they would continually get together and exchange knowledge so that we have no gaps or minimize the gaps between theory and practice. One of the very foresighted ideas that the Natural Hazards Center had was to create quick response grants. And you would actually prepare a grant before a disaster ever occurred. And if that flood or cyclone in Bangladesh or earthquake in Japan were to happen, one would immediately be cut an airplane ticket and be able to go and be prepared to be there immediately, rather than to have to start from really a point of limited resources and limited organization. One would be pre-prepared. And so part of the process that I'd like to share in terms of this rapid visual site analysis is one of these methods for how does one actually prepare to arrive at and gain an understanding of place, and of the place as Professor Kanda described it. We have here an image of the Utatsu town, in its train station sign, an image before in bloom, and the realities of the post-tsunami context behind that sign. The group did a lot of preparation before going to Japan in the way of assembling an enormous body of materials that would be useful on site, a lot of base maps in different scales, because we knew there would be no ability to reproduce any drawings. We had to take everything that we could imagine would be useful with us, and Emily Lowe is really the person who helped pull together this package comprehensively. And even so, we knew we would not be prepared for what we would experience at this settlement that you see here, and the purple area being the principal area of tsunami impact, both in the coastal lowlands and then the sweeping up river valley quite far through a process of acceleration that happens in these coastal wave environments. The team arrived as a set of students from MIT, Miyagi University, and Keio University. And the first principle for arrival, notwithstanding a very highly structured approach to site analysis, and was that on the first site visit, no photography, and really almost little or no speech. Really, people were just to move through the place, and in the course of that movement, also to be recording the kinds of experience in place on plans, so that one could understand later some of the ways in which different experience were related to very, very localized types of aspects of the place. There was an intensive process that we had, and just to give a sense of the time scale here, the group arrived and we had, after this initial afternoon arrival, had 2 days on site. And normally you'd say, well, what can one do in 2 days? And that's a really serious question, because it means that it really kind of requires one to ask, is this, how can this be meaningful? How can this really be profoundly meaningful and also enabling of good work? And so in some respects, we took those questions very seriously and experimentally, willing to acknowledge if they worked or not. And that was a crucial dimension of the project, that every hour had to count. It had to count in different ways, too. We really wanted to be going back and forth between modes that were analytical and intensive in their empirical observation of site conditions, and then also more interpretive and experiential. This couldn't be left in such a short time scale to an unplanned schedule. It really had to be choreographed as a method. And we took the idea of rapid visual site analysis in part not as it was not entirely new, because in our FEMA organization, there are methods for rapid visual assessment of buildings, both pre and post seismic disaster. And so adapting those kinds of pragmatic methods and field methods that were applied to the assessment of buildings, we said, okay, how can we do this with respect to place through intensive modes of site analysis? And how can that type of site analysis be both familiar in terms of professional practice, but also highly innovative? And that combination is a kind of a pragmatist philosophy in the deepest sense of the term, of how one tries to work with some ways of working that are very familiar and professionally grounded, and yet also be moving into new types of space and inquiry based both on the expectation that will be important, but then also knowing when those openings will occur. And so in the methods of site analysis, again, it being a short time, we came to make an assumption, and I think this is an assumption that welcome questions or kind of challenges to, but an assumption that it's very difficult to understand areas or spaces on such a short time scale, but that transects can be intensively observed, that transects that are meaningful and kind of cut across the land in different ways can be meaningful in helping to comprehend the structure of the land. And then if those observations are shared between one team and another, one can build up a collective sense of the structure of place. And each of the yellow bands here is indicating the transects that many of the students, many of them are in our group here this evening, undertook. And they too can respond to questions about both the accomplishments and limitations of that approach. A lot of work, again, in the field. All the mapping was done both in the parking lot and on the side of the bus, taping up everything that we had and building progressively through time. One of the unexpected types of transects at the site that became highly significant, that one of the teams focused on, Young's group, was what we call the slopes of Utatsu. It's not a transect properly, but really an elevation of a fairly steep set of slopes that define the lowland-upland relationship at Utatsu. And so in this elevation, what we observed that couldn't have been observed from either the aerial imagery, satellite imagery, or any of the topographic maps in this area of Japan, was that many of these areas are unscalable, unevacuable, both before and after, and that the evacuation routes were far more limited than might be imagined. And so on day one, Young and her team were able to start to differentiate among slope conditions in detail, developing a matrix of both their morphology and some of the post-tsunami effects or impacts on slope conditions and thereby evacuation routes. Focusing in even more closely in detail from the level of those transecting classification to the very precise conditions that one can observe in places where there are bedrock outcroppings, soil conditions of a particular type, the rooting depths for tree and other vegetation, and the slopes and slope distances that would be profoundly important for any kind of post-tsunami planning, kind of call it area planning, as well as site planning and design. And differentiating slopes A through E and moving through this work was highly useful for all of the teams that worked at the site scale. The Western Valley team of Phi, who's here, and others we're looking at a valley that is crossed by the Japan Railroad embankment, but which nevertheless suffered a major kind of wave impact, both on the frontal side of the embankment, but also on the reverse side. There was a recognition that another team made that the terrain was so varied that the housing vulnerability varied enormously within areas of a slope. And this team that Florence Dowdy and others were involved with was able to differentiate how this intermediate zone of slopes was particularly variable. And the kinds of generalizations that could be made in the lowlands were quite different from those, and the highlands were quite different in this intermediate zone, and that special attention would be needed in such places in the course of reconstruction. Other teams looked at the evacuation times and distances. This is the first stage of an analysis where you're just looking at concentric circles, but all of those slopes and site conditions affect the path and time of evacuation, and mobility was crucial, and some slopes were trafficable by able-bodied folks, and others would need assistance or gentler types of slopes to move from upland to lowland if one is going down to one's boat or back again to safety. That was really the course of the site analysis on the ground in Minami Sanriku, and the test of whether it was effective or not really would have to be whether some of the ideas for subsequent site planning were sound. Did it yield some good ideas about places for a possible community center? That's the question that we were asking ourselves. And what was striking in the work that followed in the development of the site planning ideas that followed was that it wasn't one location for a community center that was identified, but rather both multiple sites of community significance. And in another diagram, I don't think is part of this presentation, but that these were also networked amongst them, networkable both amongst themselves and with smaller sites within this very localized area. The kind of level or depth of student team ideas about siting, the locating of community facilities was impressive. As an educator, I'd say I was impressed by what people found as places for building and rebuilding, because we couldn't have predicted in advance, and I don't think we could have found it with some of the other types of site analysis methods I've used before, or teams of us have used before. We move now into the a stage of the planning in which people, the student teams were doing program analysis and asking really what did different members of a community, different seasons of the year, different types of rebuilding, different conceptions of community center, what might they entail in terms of space and place. And that type of inquiry was then accompanied and followed by some very initial schematic design proposals. Regrettably, that was a time when Jegan and I had to go back to the United States, but Shun Kanda sensei was the leader of that, and so I'm going to turn back the narrative to him at this point. But I did want to share this whole way in which something very as familiar as site analysis, which is part of every project that a designer ever does, can be transformed into something of profound depth and significance in this kind of work, and which I think has a wider significance in other parts of the Tohoku coastal environment and ways that could be replicated both in many places and by many, many, many people. So thank you very much for this time, and let me turn it back to Shun.
So Jim and I proved to be a very good team. I was very taken by the fact that he did this analysis that you saw essentially in 2 days, including evenings. So it's not 9 to 5. I would see the team going in the hotel lobby till close to midnight every night. I don't know if there are any questions at this point, or we should just go on. Just go on. I know that, as Jim mentioned, there are students from this particular workshop this summer. I do have to go through this quickly. It's what I would call the idealized and ultimate and the optimum proposal that the students made through the summer, choosing 5 very well thought out sites for a possible memorial community center. I say idealized because for this to become real, it's going to take some time. It's hard to propose this at this time to the city. I've tried a few times. They have the report, but their minds are slightly at a different level. So please understand that this is something that is in our minds and being propagated, being advanced as a notion. But for what happened after the summer, starting with September, these are different variations. It actually went beyond site selection. Many of the students actually did physical sort of schematic design proposals. What if you were to build? And some of this might reappear later on, but to the extent that there was a whole variety among the 5 schemes, within 2 weeks following the Jim's portion was also quite amazing. 3 of them chose high ground, very significant locations. 2 of the groups decided to actually go to the low area. And one of them, including this one, is actually a very significant concept in trying to take care of the debris of the damaged, in taking the debris to make a new kind of memorial burial, adding to a hill that was at the site. The notion about the community center, which sounds like an architectural notion, but the notion of trying to build a community center for this situation, I think, is going to be turning out more and more not so much a building type, but it's essentially a socio-political move. And I'm afraid I'm going to take you into a little bit of what I think I'm running into, which has a lot to do with the fact that community center, as we or as many of us understand it in the Western way of thinking, does not exist in Japan. So I'm putting out a little polemic here that may be argued, but there are different forms of gathering places, namely sort of a municipally assigned meeting place and so on. But the notion of gathering, the notion of a square, the notion of a plaza, traditionally in Japanese cities does not exist. And that's a whole different lecture, so I should prevent from going into that. But it's basically street-based in Japanese culture. Where you gather is usually more under the dictum of you must gather because you will hear a sort of a decree or an authoritative direction from above. So as a public, sort of a democratic, normal people, the working people coming together doesn't necessarily exist. So there is no really social gathering place as such that many other cultures know of. So a community center, even the word community may be actually something that deserves a long discussion. So to try to come up with this notion from the outside, I'm being Japanese, I am still going to this context saying with a very large hypothesis that says the people who have been relocated, have lost their homes, will be housed. So that the central government will provide. However many temporary housing, that will be provided. What is not provided, in my estimation, and I think it's still true today, there is no provision for a gathering place outside the unit. That's called a dwelling unit. So that's a problem for me. That's a problem for a place that has temporary housing that has been chosen by lottery. The people have been chosen by lottery where to live. Sorry, Joel, I'm going to bring this image later on, but after this stage of being in an evacuation center, a refugee place, for March to around May to June, the next stage was to move these people to temporary housing. And so that meant people would be housed away from the gymnasium, the public school buildings and so on, that was the evacuation center. They had to be moved to a temporary place. And where you lived was by lottery, and up to 4 people to a unit. So if you had 5 people in the family, that's a problem. There's a separation that's involved. I mentioned at the outset that these are very diverse villages, that they were diverse and proud and traditional small villages. There was rivalry, to some extent, some hostility, but in the main, it was a healthy rivalry. So if you're from a different neighbor, if you're from a different village, you actually don't know the village, nor are you necessarily friendly. So all of a sudden, in Minami Sanriku, which is one of many in the Tohoku area. Just in Minami Sanriku, which had 10,700 population, the people who had lost their homes were divided into 58 sites. It's a lot of sites to be fragmented. Some as few as 10 units, some as many as 50 on the average, and some as many as 240. So they were all relocated to public property land. And so that's why the size varies and the location varies. Since June, the people are housed there. It's very tiny. There are two yojohan, two 4.5 mat rooms, side by side, and a smaller area for entrance, kitchen, bath. So that's a very tight, squarish area. They were built very well. They had professional housing companies and prefab makers. So the units are very well built. But at the same time, you're seeing some pictures now. They're actually quite anonymous. They're very rampant. They are usually the same throughout. They're very tight. And you see one of the site plans. There's really usually no difference in the site plan despite the location. There are rows. Usually the windows face south, the entrance is on the north. And so in the main, today is 8 months or so since 311, but since they moved in, about 4 or 5 months. The question about where is a place outside their unit. Even now, there's a shortage of places to shop. There's very little sort of common places for elderly care or for children, young children care. Employment is not necessarily there. So they're allocated to these units, and they're very functional, but to many of us, what's glaringly absent is any kind of gathering place outside the home, be it outdoors or be it under a shelter, protected. So early on, my decision within the MIT 311 initiative was not an interest in helping with the shelter, the housing itself. The housing, I think, I knew would be provided by hundreds of architects in Japan, hundreds of builders in Japan, and they have been provided. What was predicted was there would be no funding nor possibly no priority for housing. So the next priority probably is going to be infrastructure, meaning roadways, probably a seawall, things that are actually of a larger scale. The prediction is 2 to 3 years people will be housed there. There's a lot of guesses that it will probably be at least 5 years because the land allocation is very messy. People have lost their land. People are not saying they will go back to the land. And is there a new place to move to? So there's a lot of land use, legal issues. Where do you actually move? And so the story, I think, is the problem is still yet a long way off. So in deciding to build something that would come close to a place to gather, we had essentially a fairly ambitious idea of the community building. If we can provide a community building central to many of the locations people might use. But it soon became more than apparent that these villages are quite distant from each other. And Tohoku actually is actually very spacious. There's a lot of land in Tohoku. So the bays, the villages, are actually quite far apart. And it came clearer and clearer that, and it gets very complicated, but Minami Sanriku is divided into 4 districts. There are 4 districts which were merged some years ago. So, and then each district, each of the 4 districts has anywhere from like 13 to 14 villages. So the political and the social sort of consolidation that has to happen is very tricky. The mayor is from one of the townships, the vice mayor is from another town, and then sort of the section chief is from another town. So getting agreement is very difficult. So what happens is that sort of equality starts to pervade. If one of the 58 sites gets a community center, 57 others should get a community center. So I don't want to criticize Japan. It's a kind of a good thing and a bad thing, but we don't want confrontation by nature. We would rather have silent agreement and sort of a semblance of equality. So dividing up or favoring one over the others is very touchy and very difficult, meaning it's a stalemate. So if the town gets from the central government $250,000 to do a community center, how do you divvy up the $250,000? Do you make 58 small community centers, or do you make 1 or 3? So that's not very promising. So in the meantime, we are looking for a site, in a sense. Well, first of all, we're looking for the mayor to say, why don't you build a community center somewhere? And we'll say, yes, I think we can help. That's on one hand. On the other hand, we're looking for a site. We're looking for who needs a community center. Can we hear somebody? Will somebody raise their hand and say, I need a community center? We go around. The first 3 weeks after September with the professor and students from Miyagi University was mostly spent driving around, checking every temporary housing we could go, and trying to size up the situation, talking to people, and seeing, do you need a community center? Not in that way, but trying to size up. So those are very frustrating moments for us, I think. Where's the face of the people that would raise these questions? Meantime, we began to see that people are gathering outside. People are actually having communication. As they get used to each other, there's some cross communication. On a fine day, we began to see people outside. And tents would go up. This is a tent by the Red Cross. And on Saturday, Sunday, these volunteers from all over Japan, very young volunteers, would come. And this is an amazing scene here. Somebody's offering a massage. Please lie down, I'll give you a massage. There's a little band from students who came and serenaded while people were chatting and receiving a massage. People have signs here saying, I will wash your window. I mean, anything that they could think of. Saturday, Sunday was a very joyful day. And as long as there was tents, people would gather. So you knew that life outside their own unit was beginning to emerge, which is hopeful. Eventually, and this is only about 2.5 weeks ago, Jim, and I began to move to Sendai as a place to live. I was planning to live in Tokyo and teach and visit the site, but I decided I should move to Sendai, which is at least 1.5 hours closer to the site. And about 2.5 weeks ago, we were looking at walking around this site, which is 240 units, just like this in a row. They're very much, this is the biggest one, and there's about 693 people living here. Some single, some parent and a child, some are just a couple. Identical units, all in a row. And we were interested in this one because this was large number. But again, you can see the layout. Keep in mind that not everybody is in poverty. There are people they must have salvaged some of the properties and so on, but parking and so on is there. So this is the lay of the housing units, and I'm still going around. In the meantime, I should say that there are students working with me in Japan, as well as by remote connection to Joel Lemaire here in the Department of Architecture, trying to simultaneously design a prototype community center. But here we came upon a group, here is one situation where but every week I'm going to the mayor's office and saying, basically trying to find out if there's any way that something might come by way of permission or funding. These are people from Boston, from the foundation, and the other person is from New York. So we have visitors who are coming around also trying to help us. So what happened 2 weeks ago is a very small event, but I think is a potential dynamite that could happen and change certain things. And I just want to dwell a little bit on this terminology here. This is a group of ladies who happen to be in one alley, about 6 or 8 of them, adjacent alleys, and they're all in their 50s. They look very happy here, but they found this bench, which was built by some volunteers. They brought the bench and table over here and just basically sat down the bench in the alley about 4 weeks ago, before I met them. And they named this Babadoru Gochome. And I just go through this story a little bit. There's a pastry called Mamadoru, which is, I don't know what it means, but Mama and Doll. It's from Fukushima, the other prefecture. And they took that pastry and they call themselves Baba, which is grandmother. And so but Baba, they were debating. They don't want to be called really grandma, they want to be made Baba. So they debated that. Dori means in Japanese street. So they thought Baba Dori, which sounds like the street of old ladies. So they didn't like that. So they twisted Dori into Doru, which sounds like the doll, and then basically anglicized it and said Babadoru. Gochome is 5th intersection. They're in the 5th alley down the row. So they adopted this name. They're out here during the daytime, 8 to 4, 8 to 3 o'clock, and they have found ways to invite others to come in. So by pure chance, so this is what it looks like, right? You see the bench down the alley. And this is the typical layout. You can begin to see that people are beginning to inhabit the alley. It depends on the alley, though, because the neighbor might say, please don't do that. Then what happened is a friend of mine from Tokyo came by. Accidentally we met. You have the laser, I think. Thanks. And I don't need to point these out, but what I really want to talk about is the fact that the people is the whole issue. This is a friend of mine. He's a social worker from Tokyo who is working with an NPO, and she happened to be here trying to talk to the ladies about starting a certain kind of new business so that they can make some profit while they're waiting. This is a professor from Miyagi, and then he's a resident. She's an assistant working with me in Sendai. So she said that you architects are looking for a building we are only looking for a building. You have to look for people, which I've heard before, but so she says, you need to talk to these ladies. And so we sat down, or she sat me down, and pastries and tea. And before we left, they had assigned us to do a roof over this thing because it's getting cold, it snows. And so I said, yeah, we can do a roof. And then eventually it grew into something else. But so this was the beginning of I suppose, a seed of a community center. I could not ask for more. This was like October 20th. And we sat down and said, yep, we need a roof. Maybe some cover around their bodies so that the cold winds coming from the northeast could be protected. And we have no money. So, but we had promised to do it. So we just simply said, let's see what we can do for 100,000 yen. Jumaeng, which is about, today is how much? 77 yen to a dollar. So it's about $130, $1,300. And we'll do it for $1,300. And since I had to come back to Boston for this, I said 3 days we have. So we said we'll do it on November 3, 4, 5, and then on November 6, we'll have a celebration. So we committed ourselves to doing something we thought we would never do, which is a canopy over some benches. It actually was what I think was needed in terms of trying to fulfill our larger goal, our eventual goal. This was built without a permit, so therefore we cannot touch any of the buildings. We're just resting everything on the roof. Every day I was watching out for the mayor or somebody from the office saying, stop what you're doing. But it turns out that once, and you can see how people are actually beginning to inhabit these tables. There are people coming by offering drawings, offering poetry, offering pastry. And then the issue was I needed labor. So these are volunteers from Tokyo. And they came very quickly. They're mostly volunteers that some of your students here might know, but they're past students. They skipped work. They didn't skip class. The students couldn't come, but those who were working skipped work to come. And we found a lumberyard who brought us lumber, and we went to business. So what was amazing is then that the residents started to pitch in, and you know, there's always this what do you call lag. Like we go in and you think that they're people, but for example, they're all fishermen, so they can handle stuff better than I can, and they want to do things. So this guy is a carpenter, a retired carpenter up there. He's about 80 years old. We were struggling. You can see in this previous slide. We were going to try to make the roof on the ground and then pull it up somehow with rope, 8 people. And then he came along and said, are you kidding? You should just build it on the roof. You can walk across the beams, which I don't know how he does it. And then he invited everybody else to walk across so that you could actually bang on the roof. He said 3 people can actually work on the roof. So this kind of thing began to happen. And the people are watching here. These are the residents. They're not watching. They're actually waiting to serve us pastries so that we can take breaks. Why don't you take a break? It's 10 o'clock, it's 12 o'clock, it's 3 o'clock. And they're always ready for pastries. So what happened is that this alley really became a scene, I think, always with the possibility that it could incite a major riot in some ways. So they're on the top. Working away. First day the roof was done. That's the easy part. But also with the help of this carpenter that appeared, and he vanished towards the evening. I should also say that some of the volunteers who came were ex-MIT people who were working in Tokyo, and one of the ones who came also was from Italy, another student that I knew who was working in Tokyo. But when he arrived, and he arrived basically the same day as Joel from MIT, who flew in from Boston. He spent one long 24 hours here. Antonio said, "Where is the center of this whole place, this housing place? Where is the center?" And I said, "There's no center." So it goes back to my earlier thing about Japan has no tradition of a plaza or piazza or center or even a community center. And he kept saying, "Well, but there has to be a centro. Where is the centro?" There's no centro. We're making one. Okay, so that's the roof. And these are all, they're smiling, but these are all survivors. This is Adele, who's a graduate from 4 years ago. And you see, they're always kind of taking us away for pastries. But before you know it, men don't usually come to these things. But this was man's work, so they all of a sudden appeared. And so I think that we're getting a kind of a prototype, not so much architectural prototype, but I think we're getting a kind of a social prototype that hopefully others may follow elsewhere. These are again men helping out. I think in a way they can't see us fumbling through our work. They can't stand looking at this awkward, clean hand, never have done carpentry type of clean students. So they've just come out. And then the most difficult part, and what I thought would be a gift, is a way to solve this wind barrier. Because the 2x4s or the 2x6s and the screen on top and the floor, that was just pure lumber. And being from somewhere, design school, I thought we had to do something a little more creative. So the inspiration was a fishing net, because these are all fishermen. I thought I could find a large fish net that I could hang and then somehow swirl it around the table, and then from behind pull in all different directions and put some cloth, prevent some wind. Well, on the first day I found out that no single fisherman was willing to part with a fish net, even though they had been rescued from the sea, because one, it was very expensive, I didn't know that, and two, that was their major source of fishing. And so they were cleaning even the ones that they rescued. Are you kidding? We cannot give you this net. So this became a whole different. So I think that this whole notion about let's do a community center, I mean, the lesson here is we can do something physically, but what we found out is the fact that we found a need and we found the people who really began to say, this is something we need, we will occupy it, we will build it for us fast. I'm still looking for the ideal community center site. Lessons come very difficult, and we're ready to do this, but I think that with this, and we're playing, Joel, with different ideas already about how to make it easier, because what we did is a bit embarrassing. I'll show you a little bit. So we got some strings and we found some nets for farming vegetable, and we used bamboo as to make it taut and make a curve. So the roof looks beautiful. Oh, and then the second day they said, "Can you make us a gutter?" So we had to provide a gutter, which is actually quite difficult and blew our budget. So we made this thing, which actually looks quite silly. But that's not quite the windbreaker, because I would like them to hang and sew cloth behind it. But the idea is there. I hear they're using it, but I had to come back here. So we're going to have to work on this. But just to declare that we had done our job in 3 days, we raised the banner, which is made out of trash bags, cut so they're nylon. Anyway, a lot of volunteers came by that time, and in fact, too many volunteers. So we're sewing this vegetable protecting net around the bamboo. We didn't have solutions. We just went along as we did each day. But I think that here's the floor, and I don't want to be jovial, but to promise to do this in $1,500 in 3 days is really asking for trouble in a sense, because we had no tools. We scrounged for 2 ladders, one higher than the other. We had 2 drills, no screws, hammer we had to beg. And what happens in the process is not that we can't get them, but I want to talk about the bureaucracy a little bit. To get a ladder, which costs $8,000 to anywhere to $15,000, which would blow our budget just for that, we had to ask the city, but to borrow a ladder, you had to actually go through a whole lot of paperwork. And they kept saying no, and we knew there was a ladder because we had seen it. So this is the kind of game you play, like we can't buy a ladder. I have a small rented car. I can't buy it in Sendai and drive 3 hours with a ladder. And the electrical drill. Jim, I hope we can share this kind of story in your work elsewhere, but we found the electric drill. Where do you get the power? And the power is shared by, everybody has a power outlet from the units, but I don't want to pay for the electricity, right? Because I'm not ready to pay for it. Would you put it in your unit? And they'll say, oh, no, we'll take turns. We'll take turns. So as you're drilling, it goes off, and it goes to oh, no, we're going to the next unit. This kind of thing happens. Things that I think, and then the postman comes by, and then the meter guy comes by, we have to raise the floor. All this kind of thing going on. We had fantastic weather. A lot of things were going for us, but you can see that this is not what we want. It looks okay for now, but by this time we're being begged to celebrate because there's special feasts that have been prepared. So we got the roof, and these are all of a sudden again the men appear, and so there's a big dinner. I think this man, the nice thing that happened is that there's some very heavyweights on this alley who had direct ear of the mayor, so that's why the mayor didn't come. So there was certain things that allowed this to happen, unfortunately or fortunately, because other places may not have this clout. I think this man is telling Joel, who is this one? This is Joel, this is Antonio. I think he's telling Joel about the fact that the first people who came to rescue them on the 12th or 11th was the American helicopter, because in this very spot, which is grassy, they found some chalk from the baseball field and did a big SOS. And the first rescuers were the American forces. So when Joel appeared, they all said, "Are you American? We love American. We like American." So, but they have gone through all of that in the past. So this is what it appears on the site, and that's where it is on the site, right? It's the Babador Gochome, the community center. I hope it's the beginning of many. We hope, can you see this? We hope by the end of November or December, it might be this, hopefully, because others might say, hey, we need one. And so it might look like this eventually. So we don't have too many big ambitions for the time being. I think if we can get this kind of Alice's restaurant syndrome going, we would get very close to a community center that actually is people-centered as opposed to sort of here is the building. Now, I do want to still insist that we do want to build the other one. So I want to end with something that's a bit, in a sense, daring or aggressive, and I ran out of time, so this is not in any good order, and it's actually pretty bad typing here. As we continue, I think, and this will go into next semester, hopefully, and the next 2-3 years, I mean, this is saying quite a bit, since we haven't even gotten permit to do that little thing. That and I hope some of you will back me up. I'm not alone on this, I hope. For now I am, is that don't build a coastal highway. Again, build it somewhere else. And the highway actually, as you know very well, is from point to point, but not local. It passes through the local, but it's not really for the local. And it obstructs between the town and the shoreline, which, as I said in the beginning, is extremely beautiful. Do rebuild the local train, which probably won't happen, but if JR East will rebuild this, they're the right means for both future mobility issues as well as least damaged, least invasive to the environment, I think, even where they are, if they can rebuild it. It's a good way to arrive to each of these bays as you open out from the tunnel. But I have to talk to the JR East people on this one. Don't build in the lowland, meaning elevation 0. Let's just not build there anymore. And I've been hard put to find maps and aerial photographs from 100 years ago. Much of it was destroyed. The archives for the Minami Sanriku was destroyed. But I do want to dig harder to find out at what point did people decide to move en masse to the low ground. I know that at least after the Chile earthquake, when the 10-meter seawall was built, many were coerced to say it's safe, go closer to the water. So the seawall is a dangerous omen. I would like to see people or houses being built on the hillside as opposed to the lowland or the high ground. The government is pushing for very high ground right now, topping off the mountains, the hillsides, excavating them flat, and then moving those who need to the high ground. At which point, right now, there's nothing out there, no retail, no roads, no infrastructure. So why the extreme? Why so close to the water, and why so far away from the water? But there are many places that I think that can actually build on the slope itself, some of which we studied in our summer workshop. If it can be on the escape route, away from the 20-meter height, I don't think it's technical difficulty that we can't build on the slope. I mean, it's a very advanced country in terms of building technology. But let's not either cut the hillside, which is also a very beautiful mountain area, but neither build on the ground zero. Don't build a seawall 13 meter high or higher. Try not to build a seawall anymore. Fishing, timber, ecotourism are the viable future economic base, and there are many versions of it. And then, lastly, I think once the initial fervor and the rescue is over in 2, 3, 5 years, I am very aware that there's slow disaster throughout most of regional Japan, which is which is not the dying, but the aging population, the lack of young people, the timber industry going afoul. It's a diminishing population. So throughout the land, there's a lot of slow disaster happening in many places. Just quickly here, these are monuments that Jegan found along the way that go back many years. Monuments up in the hillside saying, don't build below this monument. We've had tsunami before, and there are many of these to be found. Even in this area, I think you can tell that if you build on the lowland, it's bound to be inundated, because you got two sides. One is the bay, and one's the river coming in. So it probably used to be estuarian. It used to be probably water. Our students brought to mind a lot about the relation between the mountain and the water. Both are important, and that people have to find somewhere in between. These are from the summer. This is another one from the summer. The proposition to actually not dam the rivers, but to actually bring the estuarian, both ecology, but also the culture, the economic base for a more inundated wetlands area close to the shore. Other places are built on the cliff, not on the top of the mountain. I'm sorry to bring in Italy, but there's a very good example from Japan. This is in Ehime, in the Shikoku Peninsula. Totally always swept by typhoons, but still surviving quite well. Same town. So one can be close to your fishing economic base. You can see the ocean. You can have your fish hatcheries. Be safe where you're living. And so get that balance back again. I would hope that much of this is what is going to be happening. I'm sorry that I ran out of space for all the students at the bottom here, but all the people who've participated. There are many, many, many that's actually continues to participate, and I really thank that group. This is the mayor. This is our July picture. And I thank the MIT as a whole, who for year one has had a major generous support, financially, encouragement-wise, without which we wouldn't be there, and hopefully we make some impact in this disaster area. Thank you, Ute, for inviting me to this session. Jegan. Thank you.
I just want to really thank Shun Kanda and Jim and also all the students for sharing this material. And really, Shun, thank you for coming back, because we really had asked him to come back and share also what happened in the meantime. And if I can ask you all on the table, because Jegan actually will, as a respondent, also put some questions forward. We also hope that you all could come and see what our students proposed from the art, culture, technology side. And we will have a public exhibition on December 5th, December 5th from 7 to 9 in the Cube, where the students for the creative response to conflict and crisis class come up with. And I think there are some very shared approaches in terms of rather think process than product.
Oh, I have a mic.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So I think we have about 20 minutes left. I'll speak for about 10 minutes with you guys, ask some questions, maybe create a good conversation, and then maybe another 10 minutes for questions from the audience. First, I just wanted to say that, I mean, for me personally, it was an amazing experience spending time with you two over the summer, as well as seeing the workshop unfolding, and then kind of, seeing what just happened here, and it being a very lighthearted, fun event. So seeing that trajectory was very incredible for me. And of course, I want to thank you again for giving me the space to actually be with you guys and experience an actual major zone of emergency and see this firsthand and understand what it is that's happening in the field. And again, coming from art, culture, and technology, our interest I think parallels your interest in site design as well as research on the field in Minami Sanriku. And of course, I mean, as a class, we're interested in ideas of identity, history, and culture and memory, and all of these things. And I think working with you guys, maybe for a longer term, and having done that in the summer as a group from MIT, I think that brings in different perspectives to the same problem. I think could be very, very fruitful. And so I think to start with some questions, the way I see how you two are sort of approaching it is, Shun, I see your work as being more focused on what to do architecturally or with planning after a disaster has happened. And then I see your work more as how disasters can be prevented in the first place. And then I see your work as more about trying to understand the relationship between nature as such and between that and human-made structures. And so I have some questions that relate to those kind of two general ideas of both of your works. Shun, when we talked yesterday, you described this as a seed, and you reiterated that today. But you also said that this is a seed to start a revolution or a blossom that will result in the implementation of more community centers and the creation of more public spaces in general. Considering the limitations that you've constantly encountered in working in such a politicized space, I'm wondering what you think are the possibilities for actually extending this model more, based on the images you showed us, but also creating a more permanent community memorial center, the way you envisioned it from the beginning.
Yeah, I think that in some ways I was naive going in, meaning if I can do a physical shelter of some sort, but especially community center, which would be collective, it can be done, because it can be done. I mean, it's physically, it just takes materials. But as I see more and more, and being there this past 2 months, pushing the notion of a community center, any scale, is essentially a provocation. And it's a provocation that I don't mind. In some ways I relish, because something has to change in many ways. This occasion, I mean, it's an emergency, right? There's a dire urgency to come together. And where do you discuss this? Where do you talk about this? These 6 or 7 or 8 people around the table could actually make a difference will have a voice to make a difference, to actually affect something larger than just a roof over their heads, and they have pastries and tea. So I think that it's reminiscent a bit of the 70s, good or bad. But I do think that I've chosen the right topic in a way to really go between the administration side, which is completely trying to be equal to administer properly, as well as those who are saying tomorrow we need to do something, because it's getting cold, we're lonely, we're fragmented, we need to make friends. So I think that this is really a catalyst for post-disaster, seeing if so-called togetherness can be had by their own wish and by their own means. And it's once having stepped into that, it's very difficult to kind of say, I'm done, I'm leaving. I just want to get more people, both Japanese and faculty, but also very much the local people. Yeah, it's very clear to me that they want to do this.
Right. You also mentioned how historically these kinds of public spaces were not common in Japanese towns or cities. Do you think the disaster will reveal the need for having a space where you can communicate and address the solutions that in a post-disaster situation, where the disaster sort of reveals the need for it?
Yeah, one would think so, no?
Right.
One would think so. I mean, it's very touchy for me to say too many things because I'm not a sociologist, I'm not a psychologist. But when you see a very long line waiting for water post-disaster, on one hand you could say how well behaved they are. Look at them, they're all in order. Nobody's ransacking anything. They quietly wait, and that's same for going to toilets in the Johns. It's same for waiting for 3 telephones that are working because their cell phones are not working. Everybody's in a neat line. So you could say it's a very nice, orderly, well-behaved society. Amazing. You could say, I could say, why aren't they chatting with each other? They're in line 1 hour. Can I talk to this guy who's behind me? Can I talk to someone? Can I get out of line because I see a friend and talk? That's a stiff situation that I hope in some ways that can be questioned, but what is it that prevents them from breaking out of line? Mm-hmm. Not to get ahead, but just to say, isn't it a nice day today, or share the sorrow even, and so, I mean, that's why the bench is working, because finally, even locally, just in that alley, they told me that till they had the bench, they were inside simply sharing the sorrow with the same person in front of you, which is your husband or your wife or your surviving child. Once they came out, they stopped doing that. And they would talk about, where did you get this mamadoru, or it's persimmon season, it's nice that you got that somewhere. Or how's your husband? He's still waiting for salmon to come or something. So I'm in a quandary as to how much. My intention is not to bring it up polemically or verbally, but if I have an umbrella or a roof, it seems that that's a potential way. Just say, come under the roof. So I hope I made a good roof.
Well, it brings me to my next question, this orderliness you mentioned. You said that one major inhibitor for the creation of community centers that are built or on existing temporary housing units is consensus. And there's a tension between the political and the personal. And some users of temporary housing units want to be left alone while others want to participate actively. So a hard decision cannot be taken at the municipal level. And so the question is, this raises the real issue of your work with the 311 initiative. Is it a matter of architectural design or negotiations at the community and political levels to realize a center?
Yeah, I don't want to dominate all the answers. But
well, I have 3 more questions for James. Yeah, so we'll get to that.
It's also just that I got back 2 days ago, and my mind's there still. I think that, I just give you one example, I think, that architecture does in fact really relate. and I don't want to get into politics as much as I already am, but if I take the issue of how do you heat, how do you cool, how do you get hot water, how do you get fuel to heat the hot water for drinking tea, it's the utility issue for, say, a community center. Well done, not well done, but if I have to talk about utility, I have to design it well because the utility bill has to be paid by the users. The government's made it very clear that they might be able to subsidize at some point the building of the community center, but the utilities is not by the government. So everybody's worried about, I don't think I can pay the utility. Or if I don't use it and Jim goes there every day to have tea, why would I have to pay? Or if I have property 2 years from now, I'm going to move out. Let me put it the other way. He's rich, I'm poor. He's going to move out in 2 years. I'm going to be stuck with a bill because I don't have a place to go. So this is the equality issue again. And so I have to come up with a solution that, at least in terms of utility and the building itself, insulation-wise, breeze, ventilation, so it has to be comfortable enough, but also affordable enough so that it doesn't encumber the users. That's an architectural question. That's a responsibility of the one who designs and builds it. And that's separate a bit from the political. The political is how to get the site to build it and to find a way to finance it. And if I can maneuver and persuade those who can bring it, I can be political. But past that, I'm hearing sufficiently from the users who are saying, one day they told me out of the blank, they said, we don't need a community center. Till then, I was showing them potential, and I said, no, we decided we don't need it. And the reason was, it's an encumbrance for paying the utilities. Again, not pure money. It's that he might be encumbered, or you may not use it. And so that's so the answer could be like, well, the city could pay for it. Then I have to get back to the political side, but it's in that, it's to that extent not in the budget somehow.
But it seems like the political here, because it's a disaster zone, there's so many things that are involved, it's always going to precede, jumping into some kind of design that could almost immediately solve the problem. We're running out of time, so I'm going to jump to Jim. One issue that you talked about in some of your writings is that we need to consider natural environmental systems and the resource needs of a human society together. And do you think in the case of Minami Sanriku and the Tohoku region in general, this consideration may have been forgotten over time?
Let's see if I can get on here. Yeah, it's a good question, but I'm not sure about the forgetting as compared with certain types of knowledge that can be really brought to bear in this context. We often speak, for example, in the US context about what we call the levee effect. When you build a levee, it creates a certain sense of perceived safety and also risk. People aren't unmindful that the levee might be overtopped or breached, but they are led to think that one can invest and be protected up to certain expectations. That levee effect is predictably has the kind of responses that we see in what might be called the seawall effect in the context of coastal Japan. And so one still oftentimes needs a levee or a seawall, but one also needs to have a very strong set of, again, it's the parallel of non-structural social practices and that are adaptive to these kind of risks that still remain or are yet to be imagined. I think that's the other, perhaps the better dimension of it. There's aspects of human-environment relations that are yet to be imagined because in coastal Japan you had very strong traditions of evacuation practice and planning as well as the structural protection, so there you had both structural and non-structural approaches. The balance everywhere worldwide has been historically on the structural, when it really needs to be much more kind of rebalanced between the two. But this new three-quake-driven tsunami of a magnitude, not previously known in history, was unforeseen and unimagined. And so now the imagination, one has to think, how can one imagine human-environment relations that have not been perceived historically, as well as those have an active kind of historical remembering of those that have, like the Chile tsunami.
Right, which was much more
less.
yeah. As I observed you working with the students in Japan, I was intrigued by the concept of the transect, which you introduced us to here. From my understanding, you introduced it in the workshop as a process of dissecting a site to research and understand the complexities that lie along a particular layer or strip of space. How did this idea of having students work with the transect as a key component of the site analysis come about? And is this something that's used generally in other fields?
Yeah, it's widely used in both the natural sciences, where vegetation analysts will do a transect, and geomorphologists will also, to understand landforms, will do various kinds of transect analysis. And in urban studies, we have similar types of approaches. So it's a fairly widely used. I think one of the key dimensions of it, you mentioned this, use the term dissect, and I think that reflects the analytical aspect of it. But the other side of this transect type of work that I think was at least as important was, and students can correct me if I'm wrong, when you're actually walking that path, you are really absorbing some sense of the land and its qualities through space, and the kind of walking back and forth, just as the vegetation scientists will count every plant along a string that constitutes a transect. You get to know a place intimately. So it has a form of, I call it emotional inquiry and engagement with place, as well as analytical. When the two come together, you have true transect analysis, in my view.
I have one more question for Shun before we go to the audience. It's a more general question. As someone who has worked for a long time on understanding natural landscapes in relation to design landscapes, perhaps you can give us your perspective on the commonly known term natural disasters, and whether you think disasters are natural to any extent.
Yeah, you said Shun, but I think you meant me.
I didn't mean you. Yes.
And so we have in our disaster resilient design seminar an enormous amount of engagement with theoretical work. And there's a large number of theorists who just say there's no such thing as a natural disaster. By definition, there's no disaster without human beings, and there's no... the problem sometimes occurs if that gets taken too far, and the comprehension of these physical phenomena is lost. So it's really, this is why this human-environment relations philosophically, as well as for all practical, their practical and spiritual significance is so fundamental. One of the worst things that happened in the modern university, I'll just be polemical, is the division into natural and social sciences and humanities and arts. And we're struggling against these boundaries between schools and between disciplines. And it's with experience in the fields of design, we feel quite comfortable crossing some of these boundaries, but we're swimming against the current. And many universities, when you ask, where is the human environmental inquiry at this place, it's having to bridge where it shouldn't have to. We really should have disciplines where this is kind of at the core of inquiry, as compared with, on the edges of their schools or disciplines. So maybe that'll provoke a reaction, but...
For people who are interested in this topic, on Friday at Tufts at the Fletcher School from 1 to 5 o'clock, there's going to be many discussions about Japan, the Great Eastern Earthquake, and innovating for the future. So if people are interested in that, that's Friday at Tufts Fletcher School from 1 to 5. I've been to Japan twice, and one of the things that I noticed, one of the things that I missed in the United States is the bathhouses. And I'm wondering about them as a community center. I noticed you had a drawing there where you had bathing included in the community center. And you also had solar and a radiant floor for the bench, for the babadoro. And I'm wondering about a solar bathhouse, maybe with rainwater collection in a cistern and things like that, so that you minimize the costs to the people who use it. And could that serve as a kind of community focus for people where they could talk together, where they don't normally do so?
Yeah, I do. I am working with a young volunteer who has done an emergency bath for about six people, men, women, fairly good size, out of salvage fishing bins, fiberglass fishing bins. And he had solar panels and also biomass boiler systems. He had to pull them apart for some reason. I think they had to relocate. So he's on my team now, and we're going to try to pull it off on this thing that we're going to build. You're completely right. I think that tea or drink and bath would do an amazing job of bringing people together. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I want to start by saying that you're to be much commended for undertaking this effort. It must have been really hard going into that environment and just dealing with the emotions which you so eloquently spoke about and then accomplishing something. I've got a couple of questions, and I say this with the benefit of having spent some time down in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. And one of the interesting parallels that I observed was a lot of people sort of talk about natural disasters as, yes, they're problems, but they're also opportunities for doing new things that might actually be beneficial, like a community center. One could conceive of that. Different land use patterns, for example, that don't, as you pointed out, that you don't build on the lowlands, et cetera. But somehow those things just don't get accomplished, and I think you touched on what I think is a central reason for that, is there's absolutely no leadership at the governmental level. I mean, once the government comes in and builds the temporary houses, then they leave. Could you speak a little bit about what level of government ought to be involved with this kind of situation? And from your observations, what would be most helpful to you to actually accomplish some of these things, which could be very beneficial, even though they're different?
Just will mention that I graduated from LSU in Louisiana, and we were proposing back in the 70s some of the things that are coming up now post-Katrina through the Coastal Environments and Coastal Studies program. So I think one of the things that I've taken from that is that the time scale of response, there's both a short time in which things are possible and opportunities are possible. There are intermediate time scales of reconstruction that are a little bit different, but that fundamentally multi-decadal commitment is crucial, and those who have had it in Louisiana have made a difference. But it's very hard to, operate purely on the short-term time scale and be satisfied. But in the and knowing the Louisiana politics, I won't go there. But I will turn it over because in the Japanese context, the politics might be more promising.
Yeah, it's very different, and I'm again not an authority. Where I can say, and I've learned, is that being an educator, representing the fact that you're an academician, at least in Japan, seems to have the potential to be the bridge between the grassroots, the community voice, and the leadership in public office, be it town hall or governor's level, or probably less so in national level. But there is a network that one can thread back and forth if you have that hat of an academician. Not that it will accomplish something, but I think that's one agent, if I may call a teacher an agent, that can go back and forth. And the government leadership does rely in many ways to the academic opinion. And then you just change the clothing and shoes, and you go down to the community level, and they'll drink with you and they'll sit with you. So in that sense, we have less strings attached. If we can deploy it well, which I don't think is easy, and I have somebody from the Japanese consul, so I'm being very careful also. But I think that being even a further renegade, meaning I belong here, despite my citizenship, because I don't have strings there, I can actually break a few more rules, or I can enter more doors than if I'm supposed to be properly, an academician there. Whether it works or not, I can't reveal it right now. I think it works. It's working in some ways. It's a big question, though. I know that the Iwate governor, which is the prefecture north, seems to be achieving a lot more relative to community voice than the Miyagi governor. You agree? Yeah. And the governor election's coming up again, but somehow they're accomplishing many more things that we would like to do. Like, can we shift the housing units so that they're not all in a row? Can we just turn it a little bit, or separate them? There's more examples in that prefecture than in Miyagi. So, and those are all done by academicians. Those are all done by professors. So I don't know what that means, but it's hard to comprehend the politics in Japan. It's peculiar.
I think it's past 9. Maybe we can take one more question.
Hi. I have one simple question. You say like the whole community was divided in like 30 or 40 villas. I was thinking, and can you tell us like the children for that communities, they were as well relocated in different schools, in one particular school? How they are managing that particular community, the children community from that villas, from this Minami community?
Oh, I see. Yeah, they are bused to different schools. Some have been damaged, of course. The one that Jegan, you and I went, the school is damaged. The clock is stopped at 2:46 or something, and it's damaged. Others, some of them still have refugees in them. So the school children are bused, but they were bused to some extent or by car because they're distant. It's much more of a car culture than one would think because they're far apart. So they are separated, yeah. But I think things like daycare, kindergartens I think are in much need to be much more localized, and right now there isn't.
Thanks, James, and thanks, Shun. That was a great, insightful presentation and feedback on the questions.
Thank you.